Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to sit down with my good friend Agent Deli to talk about AI in video games, specifically development. It's something that I think is going to be a very important conversation going forward, and one that is I believe just sort of scratching the surface in terms of people's sort of awareness of what it is and how it works at the moment. And there's a little bit of fear and maybe a little bit of hope of what it could mean for the future. And I thought, who could possibly explain this better than you? So, did you want to give the people your credentials real fast, just so that they
Yeah,
know
yeah, yeah,
why it is that I
yeah,
thoroughly trust you on this topic?
yeah. My name is Deli. I'm a AAA game developer. I've had 7 years of experience inside the industry. I've been working as a developer since 2017. I went from Ubisoft to Microsoft. So yeah, and I think that this topic, especially with some of the news that have been announced this year at Microsoft, I think that it's just something that's in my backyard or in my wheelhouse. And so I think that it's important to talk about because there are pros and cons to it. And I think that a lot of the stuff inside the industry, especially moving forward from here on out, I think that needs to be talked about both pros and cons because I think that's when the most change and that's when the most what's it called, innovation happens, right? You can't just talk about the pros, you can't just talk about the cons. You got to talk both, at any given moment in time, and it's got to be open and honest conversation as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Which is why I think a good place to start with this is just to sort of talk about where AI is now, like in current how it's being used currently, and sort of where the conversation is going in the future, because it's making this jump to what I believe is called generative AI, where it could potentially take over more of the creative aspect instead of where it is right now, where I believe it's being used more as a tool to like help make things happen a little bit faster. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, right now, AI really, when it comes to the actual industry impact, not like gaming AI, like NPCs and stuff,
Yeah.
but AI in terms of industry impact right now, it's mostly like procedural generation. It's mostly like content that is created, more of like a tool, but content that is created that would take a normal designer hours and hours, hundreds of hours to do. Like in the most recent um, what's it called? The most recent iteration is in Starfield, where a lot of the planets are procedurally generated, and I know that that has mixed reception, inside the consumer base. But I think that if you really wanted to have that all hand created, it would have definitely delayed Starfield by
A decade.
I don't know, probably yeah, probably like 6, 7 more years, and at that point it would have ballooned the game up to be millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And I think that what's it called? I think that the game itself, Starfield, the project, would not have survived another 10 years in development because I think that by that time, technology would have changed and the scope of the game definitely would have changed as well too. Um, and just adding more and more into the game at that level, 5 or 6 years down the road with I don't know, the Xbox 2 comes out or something like that, it's definitely going to be one of those moments where a game is taking too long, is too large, and it's just ultimately become more than what it originally was. And eventually, a game's got to come out, right? So,
Fair enough. Yeah, because I know sort of one of the positive aspects that people have been airing for AI taking over more of a production role is that they're saying that one of the big problems with the games industry right now is that games keep costing more and more to make and taking longer and longer to make. As a Fallout fan myself, it's one of those things where it's like it's been a while since we had one of those. It's gonna be a while before we get another one.
yeah, it's been
This is
almost
gonna
a
go be a
decade
minute.
now. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And so the idea of being able to use AI to sort of bring ideas from concept to testable faster is something that could be really useful. But then it gets into the weeds of like, but does that cost people like hours on a job or jobs in general? And so that's been sort of the push and pull on it of like it could be a very useful tool, but we need to find the line between where it stops being an extremely useful tool and where it starts being sort of a dangerous technology that could impact people's livelihoods.
yeah. I think that I mean, for me, I think that the creative aspect will never leave. I think that the people will always have to curate the AI tools and feed AI or feed content into the AI. But at that point, you're basically having to do the work of two people. You basically have to feed the content, create the content yourself, feed it into the AI so the AI knows to create this specific kind of content. And then, of course, have to make content yourself and do
Right.
the job that you're paid to do. Um, so it really kind of comes down to, is it really ever going to replace valuable members of the production pipeline? And a lot of people say like, yes, in the next 5 to 10 years, or at least 5 to 7 years, AI generated content will kind of be a co-pilot and kind of definitely help take some of the burden, take some of the stress off of the developers. But I think that moving into the future, I think that, to me, I mean, I see AI generated content as the same as I see like, content houses for like YouTube. Like they generate a lot of content, but I think that a lot of people quickly be tired of it, just because it's more of the same every day. Um, and that's why I think a lot of people, and I harken this back to like YouTube because that's something that a lot of people know of. Obviously, you're on YouTube. Is that they're going to gravitate towards like smaller channels to kind of get curated content that, yeah, like the content doesn't come out as fast, but it's passionate, it's valuable. I think that it's going to have the same kind of negative impact on the industry, so much that the curated marketplaces will return, and only good games will be sold, right? Because the concept, a lot of the concept is that, especially with some of the news that Microsoft dropped earlier this year, is that the user will generate and play content that they want or play anything that they want, right? And it's a valid concept. Like, why wouldn't you want to play more content from Destiny? While the developers are
Right.
working on the game, why don't you create stuff that you wanted to play? Like, hey, I want to play a raid that takes place on Mars that puts me on a spaceship that takes me over to Venus. It's like, okay, that sounds pretty cool, right? Um, Again, it's a valid concept, but it's I don't think it's in any way the future of gaming at all.
Okay.
I think that there all have always been tools for people to create their own entertainment, but only those who are really truly genuinely passionate actually use those tools. And I say that I personally, because that's something that hits home for me. It's like a lot of the reason why I'm even a game developer today was because of Infamous 2. Infamous 2 had a content generation tool, like a little sandbox tool, and you'd be able to build your own levels and stuff. And it had like an entire marketplace where you can play other people's levels, much like
Wow.
Mario Maker.
That's really cool. I didn't know
And
that.
yeah, it was like 2011 or something like that, and it was
Yeah.
like super cool. And I fiddled with that for quite some time, and I like really genuinely loved it. And it was just, again, it's something, so you have to be really passionate about it. It's something you have to be passionate about. And I think that for me, when I saw that, I was like, "Oh, cool, I can make games." And
Yeah.
like, was I really making games? Like, no, in the concept that like I was just using tools that the developers gave me, but I was making content that I wanted. Um, but it took a lot of time and energy to do that, right? And so if you look at that old marketplace, or if you looked at like game packs and forums and stuff, yes, there were people making content and there were people on the marketplace, but not in the kind of level that a lot of these companies wish that AI will replace, right? So,
Right.
and I think that that's one of the things for me, is that I think that it will bring back these smaller marketplaces, and much like the YouTube allegory, it will bring back, people going down to smaller indie games and smaller channels to be able to kind of find
Yeah.
the the greatest difference in quality of a product made by an average person versus like a team dedicated to creating a genuinely good product,
That
right?
makes a lot of
And
sense.
yeah,
Because I think it was either Phil Spencer or maybe Chris Charla, who I think is the name of the guy who's in charge of ID at Xbox. But one of them was saying the other year how it's usually indie games that do most of the innovation, because when you put a huge budget behind something, you kind of by necessity need it to be successful, and so you make the choices that you can look to the past and be like, they worked there, we have to assume that they'll work here. Whereas indies are a very small thing, you can sort of go a little, I don't want to say crazy with it, but you can try a
I
lot of
think that's
newer
right. You can
ideas.
you can go crazy with it, right? Because the only thing that's holding you back is yourself. And I think that that's one of those things that like I said earlier, it's like, you know, there will always be a great difference between the quality of a product made by an average person or a small group of people versus a team dedicated to creating a good product. And no matter how many tools there are, no matter how easy it gets to create that content, there will be a large divide between design by people versus like design by like like a design by a board, you know.
Right.
And I think it with my experience at Ubisoft, when I was working with people, we wanted to create a bunch of cool stuff, and then Ubisoft execs would come down and say like, hey, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that, like, hey, how about you don't make that a woman, how about you don't make that character, can you lighten up this
Yeah.
character's skin. And it really
Really?
came down to like, you know um that kind of like spreadsheet making, like game development by spreadsheet. And it was
Yeah.
like for them, it's like they wanted to play something safe, something colorblind, in
Right.
order to make the most of their money. And which I get, because at the end of the day, their job is to look at spreadsheets and see what can be min maxed, right? But the reality of it on the ground is that it's not how that works, right? Because I
Right.
spent 3 or 4 months working on this level, and then they told me to scrap it because it just wasn't that great. So I had created something that was like super awesome at Ubisoft, and it was like this horror inspired thing, and it was great level of detail. And then they came in, they said, "Yeah, that's just kind of edgy. It's not really what we're looking for."
Right.
And then by the time I left the company, they had came out with an entire expansion that was 4-player zombie co-op, and I just was
You were
left
like,
scratching my head,
"What's up,
right?
guys?"
Because the trends changed within 6 months, so they
Right.
tried to capitalize on that trend, and that's just the folly of creating content, creating art by checklist or spreadsheets, or just trying to do stuff. But that's also the downside of like, a team dedicated to creating a good product, because of like what you said earlier, is a giant budget. $100 million is not money that I'll ever touch in my lifetime.
Same.
But if I had that money on the line, I wouldn't want to be like, oh yeah, it was a great product though, like it reviewed well. Like, no, I want it to win awards, I want it to sell well, I want people to love it,
Yeah.
right? I don't want it to
If I'm putting
just
that
be
money in, I
swept.
better be getting that money or more
Right,
back.
right, I
Yeah.
should get it back, right? And then of course, with games, it's not just like an art piece where you just, or like a painting, a traditional art piece there, I
Right.
should say, where you just frame it up on the wall and say, well, it's done,
There you
like
go.
it's, yeah, you're good now. Like one person who buys it will make my time and effort and energy back. No, you have to spend years, if most of the time you spend months and years supporting the game, which the average developer salary is like 60 to 80K. So if you're looking at a team of 100 just to support a game, you're looking at 800,000. And if you're looking at like a large company to buy the licenses and to like spend the money on like
Mm,
the licenses and stuff like that to support this kind of content and support your employees, I mean, you're looking at millions of dollars a year just on supporting the
for
game.
sure.
Not
Yeah.
even, or just, yeah, millions of dollars a year to pay the people to support the game, and not even starting to actually support the game.
Right.
So
Well, because
yeah,
that's where, again, I don't work in games.
no, it's
My
all good.
assumption is that that's where the majority of the budget for a video game goes, is just paying the people to do it. Because
It's just
obviously,
paying
if
the
you're
people.
making a
Yeah.
game, you don't have to like buy a horse. You have to pay a person to build a horse,
Yes.
right?
Right.
So,
Right.
like, that makes a lot of sense. In terms, so you mentioned sort of the indie side of it, and one of the other things that people bring up as a potential positive of AI going forward is that it'll let smaller teams sort of punch above their weight class in terms of just being
Yes.
able to make larger projects with smaller teams.
Hmm.
Do you have any sort of concerns that using AI may cause them to lose some level of creativity, or is it just, is this a situation where it's like, if I can just be a nerd for a second, as if I'm not all the other seconds of my life, it's like the super soldier serum, right? Where they're
Yes.
like, it just makes you more what you are, right? So if you are the creative type, then you'll use the AI, like it'll just be a way to make you be able to do more of that faster. Whereas if you're potentially a large company that values money over creativity, potentially you'll do that. It's like, it's going to be a sort of situation where, does that make sense? Am I making sense here at all?
And that makes sense. Yeah, I
Okay.
think that if used as an actual tool and with the content being fed into it, Yes, I think that it would be helpful, right? Like I said, it's a valid concept. There's nothing like innately wrong with it, right? It's the implication, it's the execution that ultimately will be the downfall or the upheaval of it. Because at the end of the day, like while AI may help, boost one's creative capabilities or just even skill sets, right? I don't think that it will ever be able to replace entire teams or even entire people um, at any point. I think like it can, but I don't think that it will necessarily have the same value as an actual team of people. Same like how chatbots or no matter how good the chatbots get, they'll never actually be able to replace a hotline or a chat room
Right.
dedicated for people to chat. Because a lot of what people look at in games is the human touch. It's the human element, right? You wanted to play a curated piece of content that kind of speaks to you, right? You wanted to play something that definitely is like somebody went through something in their life in order
Right.
to create this, and that means something, right? Like this definitely touches home, or this definitely reaches out and touches your soul in a way that other things may or may not.
Mm.
Movies, music, other traditional pieces of art.
Yeah.
And I think that that largest intersection for video games is all of that marred together. I think that it's infinitely more difficult to do that with AI.
Do you think there's any fear that specifically larger teams might have to sort of mess up before they learn that? Like, might go too far in the opposite direction and like remove potentially some of the creativity and then realize like this isn't really working and come like roll it back in? Is there a fear that things might get worse before they get better?
I think that it's going to infinitely get worse before any of it gets
Okay.
better. It's going to be like 20 steps back and 2 steps forward because I think that the more we learn, the more pitfalls that there actually will be, right? Because, Microsoft is a leading company, it's a gigantic company. Um, but also they are also in a danger of like having to actually pave the way
Right.
while actually innovating at the same time. And I think that for a lot of large companies like that, and not that Microsoft is new to that kind of
Not
field or
exactly.
genre of corporate creativity, but I think that it is still a hard task to do for anybody, for any company of any size. And I think that mass AI generation in games is generally going to be unsatisfying when it comes to one large aspect of gaming, and that aspect of gaming is that people seek out traditional games because they love the communal aspect of gaming, right? They value those communities. Like so much of game consumption, and you'll see this on the internet and YouTube and other things like this, right? And large content creators leverage this beautifully. A lot of game consumption is done as a community exercise. Even single player games, right? Like people care about Witcher 3 because of the amazing stories we could all experience together and talk about. Like what, was it the Bloody Baron means to you may be
Yeah.
different now than what means to you in 5 years or when you have children or when
It's
it,
so funny that you bring that up specifically because that is a running point of contention between one of me and one of my friends is that he thinks that character sucks and I love that character.
No, that character is wonderful. Like it's deeply flawed, and again, it's a character that's created out of somebody's real life experiences. Like
Hmm.
somebody thought of this character, wrote it, and said, "This is what this character would live, breathe, and think about." And art should generate emotions. So that character is equally as effective for you because you love it, and that character is equally effective to the other person because they hate it. And you
I guess
should be
that's
able to.
true. Art's
You should
goal
have the
is to make
same.
you feel things, and sometimes
Yeah,
those things
right,
are negative.
and those things are negative, and when it generates such like a massive negative emotion, it's like, is it really written bad, or is it like, do you just genuinely feel so much for this piece of content, right? Because a lot of people can kind of discern between something that's just badly written versus something that just generates a lot of emotion, right? And I know that that's a fine line between the two.
Yeah.
But yeah, but anyways, moving on from that, it's like, speedrun communities is another thing, right? They live and die off having competition, and that's a communal aspect. And they live and die off being able to discuss strategies with other people. games with lore are discussed as a community with theories, and literally there's YouTube channels built around game launches, right? Like people
Yeah.
are centered around one single game like that. I cater my entire YouTube channel to making one kind of content. You know, people get hyped together, they get disappointed together. People, I mean, people love Celeste because it's a great game, and it is genuinely. But people also love Celeste, and people love enjoying Celeste speedrunning and enjoying Celeste colors, the soundtrack and stuff together. Like I don't have the skill to pull off Celeste like as somebody like maybe as
Me
as
neither.
you do, you
No.
know, but I will gladly share my experiences with you about that game, right? And I think that same thing. People watch I don't know how to pronounce this channel's name, but I think I'm saying this right. Avati Vidyas, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
the
The
Dark
the
Soul,
Souls
yeah,
guy,
the Soulsborne guy, the Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden
where he
Ring.
always sounds like he's about to cry.
Right, right. Yeah, the lore content because they enjoy the community aspect of a single player game. Like it's a single player game. There's no community behind that. But then you look at Soulsborne and they thrive off of finding and theorizing and just talking to each other. And like I said, that human touch, that traditional aspect of these communities is something that's like so largely ingrained into video games. I don't think that mass AI generation or generated content will ever um, satisfy that need for people to um, have those communities, right? And this is not to even to mention other genres of games like MMOs and MOBAs and battle royales. Like these live and die not solely off of the game, but off of the community, right? And we've seen plenty of times, you and I both have seen games, BRs, MOBAs, and MMOs that live and then immediately die off within years just because the community fell off. Not because
Yeah,
anything else, just because simply because the community is just not there.
we've seen it a
And
lot
if
in the last year and a half. Even there's
yeah, just
been
in a
things
year and a
like,
half,
was
yeah.
it Knockout City or whatever? Like there were
Mm-hmm.
tons of games like
Yep.
that where they reviewed really well. People seemed to generally love them, but they just didn't find the community they needed in
Just
there.
didn't have the community. Yeah.
Yeah,
And if everyone is making their own similar version of that, you just can't have a multiplayer game with a thriving community. And even if the AI is used heavily in the development process, there needs to be some sort of like unifying authority that has a creative vision for the game to kind of keep people together, to just kind of keep the tools together, right? And and a lot of people will say like, oh well, if everybody's making their dream game, then all of that is lost. It's like, yeah, like it is, right? If everybody's making their dream game, then where's the community aspect of gaming?
yeah,
Like you might go share the game you made with your friends, and I might share the game that I made with you, but the community is limited to what I engage with, or it's limited to the people that I evangelize it to, right? Like I can't discover new friends. I can't, I get to hang out with you because we independently like the same game for different reasons,
right.
because people are very unlikely to have heard of the dream game that you made of. Like even if I post it to Twitter or itchy.io, why would people be looking for my game when they could just make their own, right? Like why would they make my content, or why would they play my content if they could just make their own? And even in communities with heavy user generated content like Dreams, Mario Maker, and Roblox, many of these users engage with other people to see and enjoy and experience what they have made and played together, rather than making their own hyper specific thing that is matching their taste perfectly. Especially with Mario Maker in particular, the shared rules is that everybody's still playing the same game, and that's what makes it fun, right? You're not making some
Right.
random platformer. You're making a challenge for people to solve using their existing knowledge of the rules of Mario. And I
Right.
think that it's easy for us as game devs to approach passion and engagement with games from a creative and generative aspect, right? But not all players have that lens. Inevitably, I think that both AI technology will continue to improve, and it will take some of the load off and some of the burden off, and it should, because these games are getting so large, and I just can't wait. I'm sorry, I just can't wait 5 or 6 years for the next sequel to my favorite game, because then I'm going to be I'm almost 30. I can't wait, you know,
I don't want to be
another
40
five
before
or
I get the
six
next
year.
Fallout. Yeah, I
Right.
feel you.
I don't want to, because Fallout 4 came out in 2014. I was 17.
Yeah,
Like that was almost 13 years ago. I can't do it. You know what I mean? I
yeah.
just physically can't. At least I don't feel like I can, you know. but yeah, like I said, communities will change based off of that, right? But the fundamental sense of the community that humans get from shared hobbies is not a technological problem. And I don't think it's a problem that needs to be overcome. And I think that it's the core reason for a lot of why people engage in hobbies in general. So I don't think that this is something that, I think that, metaphorically speaking, I think that the community aspect of gaming is the wheel, and you physically can't reinvent the wheel, you know?
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm really glad that you put it that way. So that sort of brings us to the topic of sort of user generated content versus AI generated content. I know that, like, strictly speaking, some of the user generated content is also using AI. Like, you'll look at a lot of there's a lot of YouTubers, to your point,
Yes.
who they'll be like, I took this game and then I used an AI to do this other thing with it, right? Uh,
That's all. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Do you think of these as sort of competing ideas of like different directions to go? Because it seems like both of them are ways to sort of increase the pipeline of content into a game faster. Do you view these as like one of them is going to win, or is it like they're both kind of going to continue being a thing? Because I've seen this being a potentially very strange debate online of being like, oh well, user generated content is lazy for the devs or like dumb stuff like that, because it's like you're just putting the workload off onto the users, and it's like, well, but it does give you a lot more content a lot faster, so it's like, what do you know?
Right. And not all content is in the same value or in the same vein, right? Like, it doesn't solve the problem that everybody still needs to agree on playing the same game rather than their own fractured version of their favorite game, right? Like, my Destiny 2 expansion is not going to be the same as your Destiny 2 expansion. And why play yours and mine when they can just play their own? But we're not, all of us are not actually playing Destiny still. Like, we're not unifyingly playing Destiny. Like, I don't come over to your house on weekends, with beers and say like, "Hey, do you want to play Destiny?" And you
I mean,
go,
that'd be
"Yeah, do you want
great
to play?"
though.
It would be great, but you don't go, "Do you want to play my version or your version?" It's like that. No, we're playing
Yeah.
Destiny. Like, we're playing one unifying version of the game, and I think that that's, like I said, I don't think this is a problem everybody needs to solve. Um, and I think that content is just that. It's just content. And like I said, it's not, content's not going to build a community faster.
Hmm.
Um,
It may
it's
keep
just
them
physically
entertained for
not.
slightly
It
longer,
Yeah, it'll keep
but
them entertained for sure, but it won't build the community faster. And I think
yeah.
that that's a large, again, one of the building blocks and core tenets of gaming as a hobby is the communal aspect. So yes, you can have tons and tons of content. I mean, look at GTA 5 role playing. Look at the content that they've put out for GTA 5, right? But if you actually dive into the community, it's so much more than just, user generated content or user crafted content or some of
Right.
the toolkits and stuff like that, right? I mean, look at CS. That was a mod for Half-Life Deathmatch, and that was user generated. Now it has its own complete crazy community. I'm part of that community, and that's one of the biggest things, is that more content doesn't necessarily mean better content or better game, right? Because how many times have you played a game like Call of Duty or whatever, and you're like, I don't like none of the maps that they launched with.
Yeah.
They launched 10 maps and you like 3 of those maps. The next game they give you 14 maps, and we're still running into the same issue. It's like, there are many
You might
people who
just not
just
like the
don't
game.
like
Yeah.
whatever it is that they came out with, and getting more maps doesn't necessarily make the game better, right? Like, that was a
Right.
large community disagreement in for Modern Warfare 2019, was that, "Oh, the game is great, it's fantastic, Warzone's a great iteration, there's tons of content to play. We don't like any of the maps." So as a 6v6 player, you're like, I don't, I like maybe 2 of the maps out of like the 40 maps that the game eventually ended up with, and and that's the problem. Like I said, why have that much content if it's not all meaningful content?
Right.
Um,
I
and
remember
if,
a
if
similar
yeah.
conversation around the sort of post-launch support of like a Halo Infinite sort of
Hmm.
situation, where it was like there wasn't enough content there, and then they ended up putting Forge in, and there was all this other new content, but people came back to it, and some people bounced off because it was like, oh well, this still isn't what I was looking for, and other people were like, well, finally there's something to do. So I think there is maybe somewhat conflicting ideas on that, but I do tend to agree with you more so, where it's like if the game is good and the content the content can be a little less
Right. And I
original.
supported Halo Infinite throughout the first rough
Yeah,
year. I played it constantly. And I ranked Diamond 5 in my first season. Like,
you
I played it a
you're
lot,
so much cooler than I'll ever
when
be.
it thank you. I played it a lot, and even with the content drought, I was playing the same maps, and I was okay with it because the game was good and it felt good.
Yeah.
But ultimately, at the end of the day, the community is what held it together for me. It wasn't the lack of maps, or it wasn't the lack of support. It wasn't any of that stuff. It wasn't the slow development pacing. It wasn't like the skins or the marketplace refresh every week. It was the community. I wanted to play Halo. I
Mhm.
wanted to well, yeah, I just wanted to play Halo, and I felt like this was the best Halo I've had in years, and I continue to play it. My friends played it on and off, and I played it consistently every day, almost
Yeah.
every month. I think there was a couple months there that I didn't play, but largely for the first year, I played a lot of hours into that game, and there was no reason for me to do that. If you look at statistically, there's no reason for me to do that. There's no maps, there's no content, no support. Mouse and keyboard was busted. Frame rapes rates were messy. Um, desync. There was a lot of hitbox errors and stuff. Like, if you look at all of those and you put
Right.
them down on a spreadsheet, it's not going to look pretty. Why would anybody play this game? Why would anybody play any other game? It's the community aspect of gaming.
That makes a lot of sense. So another sort of piece of this that I wanted to cover is recently there was a game that was announced that I think people were very excited for right up until they found out that the voiceover work for it was being done by AI. Now this
Yeah.
is a slightly different conversation than AI in game development like proper. This is sort of replacing
Yeah, this is
voice
like
actors.
branching out, but ultimately
Yeah.
it's still under the same umbrella as, like, why, like, replacing people in the pipeline.
Yeah. Um, so it brings me to a point that I've seen a lot of people pretty concerned about is AI being brought into these art forms is something that we've seen like SAG and the Writers Guild have a lot of. I mean, that was not the only thing that they were striking for recently, but something that was certainly a high point of contention in those meetings that they had. Whereas the video game industry doesn't really have a particularly strong set of unions quite yet.
No,
And so
not at all.
there's a lot of people who sort of view the increase of AI technology in the game space as like a race between like who's going to get to power first between AI and unions. And I don't know necessarily where I am with that because I think for me personally, it's like I believe that AI can be a very powerful tool, that it's going to
Hmm.
potentially help in a lot of ways to make things go faster, make things be cheaper, all of the positive things, but I also do worry about it going too far and costing people jobs at least in the short term. Um, and I think we have to, like I said earlier, I think we have to find that line between where it's very useful and where it becomes a risk. And at the moment, without unions, I don't know necessarily that I trust large corporations to make that choice because historically large corporations tend to side on the side of making money.
On the side
um
of making money, right? Because they're a
yeah,
business, not a
because
soup
they're
kitchen.
businesses. Yeah.
Yeah.
So all that to say, do you believe that that unions are very necessary for this conversation, or is it just two very completely separate areas?
No, I think that unions are important to keep, jobs to people who, well, one, are passionate to be here, right? I mean, we've had record layoffs this year. It's
Yeah.
a terrible year for game developers, and terrible years, a terrible year for content and IP when it comes to, like, being lost to the void, right? Um, I think that ultimately AI is going to be a crutch for businesses to reduce the cost of games because while we are a very large market, a market that absolutely dominates other markets combined, music and movies combined, I think that it's just ultimately people are going to be chasing dollar signs on spreadsheets, and they don't really see the or really take into effect, like, the actual reality of it on the ground. And
Mm-hmm.
the reality of it on the ground is that you never want somebody to be replaced by something that has to be fed content in order to um create stuff, right? So, like, if your AI copilot is feeding off of content from a launched game already,
Hmm.
there's a finite amount of content and information that it can extract from that piece of content. And eventually it's going to start jumbling together, and we see this with AI generated art. It's going to start jumbling together, and it's going to all start looking the same. And that's when we bring it back to, is all content valuable content?
Right.
Because how many times can you play the same mission? I mean, how many times have you played a game with, hand created stuff where
Yeah.
you're like, I'm so tired of these tailing missions, but it's like that's, they're creating content and they're trying to spice it up, but at the end of the day it's still just more of the stuff that just feels empty, or more of the stuff that you just don't necessarily like or necessarily gel with fully. And that's a part of, life, and that's a part
Right.
of businesses and risks. But I think ultimately, if you are chasing dollar signs, I wouldn't want to play 900 different free to play games every year. um
Yeah.
and just hop from one to another. I think that that would be not necessarily the death of the gaming, but I think that it would be a large hemorrhage into the mainstream. And I think that it would be encroaching on something that's more akin to the mobile space. And I know that there already is a large divide between traditional gamers
Yeah.
and mobile gamers, right?
Looking forward to
Uh,
that Elder Scrolls match 3 game any day now.
yeah. So I think that when you push gaming more towards that, and I know that mobile gaming is a large slice of our revenue inside
Yeah.
the industry.
Apparently, it's
It's
the most quickly growing or most grossing or
Yeah,
something.
it's definitely a huge tiger market.
Yeah.
Because everybody has a cell phone, right? So
Like those
I think
guys
that,
at Blizzard said that one time. It
yeah,
made
you,
people
you guys
very
don't have
upset.
cell phones. So I think that it's definitely a fine line. And I think it's a dangerous line as well to approach, because while there's heaps of pros, taking off the burden of being able to iterate faster, being able to prototype faster, being able to create stuff faster, being able to instead of relying on you, like instead of calling you on your sick day to help me make something, I could just use the tool that you have hand created for me in order to kind of help assist me in
Right.
something that I just thought of, and to see if it was going to work. Getting out builds faster. Like, yes, that's always a pro. On a spreadsheet, it's always going to be a good thing, especially as a project manager right now. I think that it's definitely something that is valuable, and I definitely want that kind of stuff. I definitely want to be able to work at a faster pace. Who wouldn't?
Right.
Um, but the detriment, I have to weigh the cons as well. The detriment is that, if people are getting fired, if people are getting laid off, if the content is just not good, if I have to spend more time fixing the content that is created by these tools, um, it's just ultimately going to be a waste of time or waste of energy for me, in order to, like, on a light technical, topic, like unwrap these UVs. It's like, or look at these meshes and you're like, wow, this looks like somebody's amateur work. And it's like, yes, it's done, but now you spend time and hours out of the day of your production pipeline trying to fix that or correct it,
Yeah.
when
Going
you
back
could have
in,
just
making sure
paid.
all the hands have 5 fingers.
Right, instead of, you could have just paid somebody who was a real human being to do it properly the first time. And I think that ultimately that is something that I'm more keen to, because I'm not quite, because while I am still like senior management, I'm not corporate like C-level.
Right.
So I'm not so detached from the human elements of team building. So yeah, I think that it's definitely going to be a minefield moving forward, but I think that we're going to, like I said earlier, have to lay the foundation and innovate at the same time. And it's really not about um it's really not about what it is versus what it is used for. The execution and implication is more important than the actual usage of it, right? Because we've seen positive uses of it, right? Like Spider-Verse had AI generated tools to make sure that a lot of the character models were meshes were like aligned properly. And that's just something that a normal animator would take hours and hours to do. A tool can do it in a couple minutes,
Mhm.
and it made the movie and it got the movie done faster.
Such a
And the
good movie
movie,
too.
yeah, and the movie's fantastic, and it
So
doesn't, it didn't make the movie any worse for the wearer, right? It didn't delay the movie. It didn't make whatever, but content was being fed into it by human hands, and I think that, like I said, if it's just exclusively used as a tool to help create and bolster the creativity of already human elements, then yes, 100%. Like I would want something done faster. Um, Replacing people who have years and years of expertise and problem solving and critical thinking skills, like no, I don't think that that's a good thing at all.
well, you sort of jumped to my last question. I was gonna ask, uh, for you, what do you think would be sort of the green grass, like perfect future for what AI will be, as opposed to if they avoided all the landmines that are undoubtedly going to be stepped on by somebody. What do you believe that that could be? Hopefully,
I just really, again, I really
yeah,
think that it's just like a tool. Like, I use this metaphor, I use this analogy, like a power tool, right? Like, yes, tightening something by hand is important because you can actually understand the tolerances. You can actually understand, like, I can't over tighten things or I shouldn't over tighten things. Like, yes, tightening my hand is important and to keep it airtight, sealed. But a power tool does in 20 seconds, in less than 20 seconds. It does in 2 seconds, right? But then, you may have gotten to a point where you're like, oh, I've over tightened this by accident. I need to untighten it. Like, yes, you can come in, but you still need a unifying creative force to be able to kind of guide this kind of stuff. And like power tools, that's a okay, to get jobs done faster. Um, but I don't think ultimately it will replace the usage or the need for handcrafted tools or for manual tools. And I think that that's, again, the expertise and the knowledge is more important than anything else, and the human element behind that, right? Because what I can do with a power tool is a fraction of what a mechanic can do with a wrench.
that makes sense. Yeah, thank you so much for talking to me about this today. Your insight on this is always so much more than I would ever be able to just like Google and find out for myself and regurgitate into a video. So I really do appreciate you taking your time to come out and speak to me.
Yeah,
Uh,
no problem at all.
which
Thank you for having me. It's always fun talking to you. It's always fun hanging out. I'm sorry I don't get to do it more often.
you're a busy guy. I completely understand. But did you want to plug anything before we close out here? Any channels or works or anything you're doing?
Yeah, the best thing that I'm doing right now is I just hang out on Twitter and I am putting content on YouTube. It's all under Agent Deli. So twitter.com/Agent Deli and youtube.com/Agent Deli. And I think that YouTube is just a hobby for me. It's another tool, just much like Twitter. It's another social media platform in order for me to connect. I would love to spend more time making informative videos. I
Yeah.
do know they take a lot of time and energy to do, but I just love making informative videos, and I love to share my hobby and talk to people about that. So I'm in the process of kind of creating a pipeline in order to make more cool content for people. I've never really done anything like this in mass, so it'll be a journey of self discovery for myself as well too. So I think it is about that time where I spend a lot of time talking about things, but I know that Twitter is very only so limited. I think that branching out toward YouTube is going to be a fun endeavor for me. So, yeah, those two are my social media platforms of choice, and it's the best way to reach me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, and until next time, I'll see you around.